Body at ease, breathing quiet, sentiment benevolent. Dharma friends, sitting still in vital silence. Wanting nothing, we practice eco-Buddhism The sound of the temple bell booms for all to cease from conflict. May the way of Buddha usher in the dawn of non-violent global village forever. Here is the after sound of the bell. Thunder of silence, light after Dharma rain. Amoga Varochana Mahamudra Mani Padme Jvala Prabhardhaya
Take a moment to straighten your mats and cushions and then stand for the chanting of the 3 refuges. Just taking a moment to feel your weight evenly distributed on your soles of your feet and bringing your hands palm to palm at heart center, gesture of sincere heart, Hapchang. We will first take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in Sino-Korean, in keeping with our tradition, and then again in English. So even if you don't know the words, just throw your voice in with the sound. Chi, chi, when go for refuge to the Buddha.
I go for refuge to the Buddha.
And resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
And realize the great way.
And realize the great way.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
And resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
And resolve with all beings.
And resolve with all beings.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
Please return to your places for another shorter period of meditation. Just taking a moment to work with our posture, feeling our seat bones grounded into our cushion or chair, hips in line with shoulders, ears in line with shoulders. A slight lift to the breastbone, a slight tuck to the chin. Staring down the bridge of the nose at a point on the carpet in front of you, a couple of feet away. Our gaze is soft, unfocused. Lips closed, teeth parted, jaw relaxed. Just taking a few long, deep breaths as you listen to the sound of the bell to carry you into your meditation practice. Join me in these simple stretches. Warming the hands and then just traveling the fingers along the perimeter of the face. And coming along to the ridge of the head, using the fingertips to find pressure points, stimulating our energy. And then the bony point at the back of the skull for the occipital ridge. Massaging the ears, giving a little tug to the earlobes. And then stretching the spine forward. Stretching to the left. And then twisting the spine. From the base of the spine, all the way up through the neck, and glancing over the left shoulder. Changing directions. Fists now at the base of the trunk, and then making slow circles, 3 times in each direction. Can you hear me? Okay. Good. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. As I was sitting here this morning, I had this very strong sense memory of when I worked in a public library about 15 years ago, and the children would come in the morning for story time, and we would all be sitting around on the carpet like this, and the librarian would sing, good morning, you slept the whole night through. Good morning to you. So good morning. I don't know, I remember that song. There's probably more to it, but that's the only part I remember. So my name is Jagwa Kelly Davenport. I am the newest Dharma teacher here in Ann Arbor as of last summer. And it's been a little while since I have given a talk. So as I was thinking about what might be particularly useful or poignant, I was reflecting on the work that our Precept taking group has been doing over the last 8 weeks. This coming week, we will have our last study meeting before a group of folks here formally commit to the Buddhist path by taking precepts, we call it. Although we're not really taking them anywhere, we're sort of taking them in, but there'll be a formal ceremony later this summer in which their commitment will be publicly recognized. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the precepts. What are they? How do we work with them? And maybe just a couple of stories and reflections from my own experience. How does that sound? Okay. So it's hard to know what to do with this thing, huh? Put it in my pocket. Okay. Oh, yeah. So I was telling some of the other teachers and students here, we met this week for our once a month kind of meeting as a group of people who are studying the Dharma. And I was telling them that I was taking this ceramics class right now with my husband, because we watched this TV program where British people who are very extremely good, like home potters, basically, do this kind of competition show. It's like the Great British Baking Show, but it's with pottery. And so we got very interested in seeing whether we could learn how to do it. And it's been a couple of weeks. And so I was telling the folks yesterday about the first thing that you learn is how to center the mound of clay on the wheel, because this wheel is spinning with a lot of centrifugal force. And that's what helps you bring the clay up into a pot formation after you get it centered. And when you see people do this on TV or, you're watching an instructional video, it looks really easy, right? There's this beautiful, like kind of molten lump of clay, and they just bring it up and then down, and then magically it's like perfectly in the center of the wheel. But what actually happens when you're a beginner is that you have this wet, heavy lump of clay, and you turn the wheel on, and you're sort of sitting around the wheel between your legs like this, and you put your hands on the wheel, and then they're going all around like this, and this crazy like lump of clay is sort of like a wild animal that you have no control over whatsoever. And the teacher is going, lock your arms, and you're like, I thought I was. So it's a lot harder than it looks, is what I've learned. The interesting thing about it, though, is as I've had a few more weeks of practice, I keep finding parallels between a lot of our Zen forms, the way that we sit, some of our breath practice, and what it takes to actually center the clay. Because the second time that I went into the studio to practice, I was getting kind of sweaty and annoyed, and I couldn't get it to work. And the woman that was there to help all the beginners said, a teacher once told me that you can't center the clay if you yourself are not centered. I was like, oh boy, here we go. So it turns out I think she was right. But the interesting thing about it is I didn't realize how much of the posture was really what was going to make it work. And so when you come here and you learn to meditate, you'll hear us giving these cues all the time about posture. And maybe as a new person, it's sort of like, well, what's the deal with that? Why do we focus on forms so much? And I was re-experiencing that as a beginner in this new craft of trying to work with the clay and really noticing the parallels of posture and breathing. And so, I think one of the reasons that we have the forms that we have, both maybe in pottery and in meditation, is it's giving you this container that's really well defined. And then you're pouring yourself into it, and you're just kind of going to see what happens as a beginner. And you have to kind of trust in the process. And so I was just reflecting on this experience when I was thinking about the precepts, because the precepts, which are the basic moral guidelines of a Buddhist practice, are in some ways one of the biggest containers that we have, that we pour ourselves into. And then we kind of learn, like, what does it actually mean to try to work with this form? So that's what I'll be kind of talking about a little bit today. I think at first, maybe similar to the pottery, we learn a lot about ourselves. So I'll go over some different versions of what the precepts actually are in a moment and read you a few different versions so you can kind of get a sense of it. But I think the point of my talk today is that working with the precepts, working with any of these kind of spiritual containers for practice, are not only about maybe becoming a better person. Certainly that could be an outcome. But more importantly, about learning the ways that we are interrelated to each other. So kind of a bigger picture. So there are 5 traditional precepts that are studied and practiced by lay people in the Buddhist tradition. People in a monastic context would have more. And what are those 5? So they may sound familiar. These are pretty common pieces of wisdom in many spiritual traditions. So refrain from harming other beings, refrain from taking what is not freely given, refrain from sexual misconduct, from false speech, and from intoxicants that cause heedlessness or cloud the mind. And there's a few other versions of these that I wanted to share because depending on the Buddhist tradition or the teacher, they may have translated these core ideas into different versions of less or more kind of contemporary language. And so I think it's interesting to hear a couple different versions. So this little booklet, Moon Journeying Through Clouds, is our liturgy book. And you can find a couple different versions of the precepts that were developed here for our community. So I will read those to you. Okay, so we actually, the precepts that our group is studying and that we generally work with here there's actually 8. So there's 5 core ones, but then you'll see that there have been others added over time depending on the community. So I'll just read the first 5 so that we can compare. So number 1, I resolve to abstain from doing harm, but to cherish all life. 2, I resolve to abstain from taking what is not given, but to respect the things of others. 3, I resolve to abstain from engaging in sexual misconduct, but to practice purity of mind and self-restraint. 4, I resolve to abstain from lying, but to speak the truth. 5, I resolve to abstain from partaking in the production and trading of firearms and chemical poisons. Okay, so that's one version. I'm going to read a little bit different version. And this is from what we call our Bodhisattva precepts. So the Bodhisattva is the figure in Mahayana Buddhism that is the person who works on behalf of all beings and perhaps even forgoes their own rewards of enlightenment in order to stick around and really help in the hardest of places. Okay, so this one, a little bit different. Do not harm, but cherish all life. Okay, that's familiar. If you violate this precept, you will destroy your seed of compassion. Therefore, you will not be able to go forth on the bodhisattva path. 2, do not take what is not given, but respect the things of others. If you violate this precept, you will destroy your seed of virtue. Therefore, you will not be able to go forth on the bodhisattva path. 3, do not engage in sexual misconduct, but practice purity of mind and self-restraint. If you violate this precept, you will destroy your seed of purity. Therefore, you will not be able to go forth on the bodhisattva path. 4, do not lie, but speak the truth. If you violate this precept, you will destroy your seed of truth. Therefore, you will not be able to go forth on the bodhisattva path. 5, do not involve yourself in the trade of liquors and drugs, which confuse or weaken the mind, but keep your mind calm and clear. If you violate this precept, you will destroy your seed of wisdom. Therefore, you will not be able to go forth on the bodhisattva path. So you can hear a little bit different tenor to that one because it tells us what seed we are nourishing by practicing with that moral guideline. And I have one more version that's a little bit more contemporary and in a little bit different order. But I like the wording of this too. So this is from a book by Diane Eschen-Rossetto, Waking Up to What You Do. This was probably the first book that I read about Zen, maybe, I'm trying to remember when I bought this, maybe 15 or 20 years ago at this point. So this is her version. I take up the way of speaking truthfully. I take up the way of speaking of others with openness and possibility. I take up the way of meeting others on equal ground. I take up the way of cultivating a clear mind. I take up the way of taking only what is freely given and giving freely of all that I can. I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. So you can hear a little bit maybe different flavor. I particularly like that phrase of taking up the way. So we have that idea that we're taking precepts when we formally commit to this path, and we will have this ceremony when the folks who've been studying them will recite them and say, yes, I'm going to be practicing this and I am acknowledging my commitment. And I like the version that reminds us what seed we're nourishing or perhaps not nourishing. But I think it would be easy to hear those and have the notion that these are some kind of direct commandments or instructions. And they are certainly guidelines, but you'll notice that it doesn't really tell you how to do any of those things. And there's no list of prescriptions of this is in the do column and this is in the don't column. And so I think that's maybe one of the common misconceptions about the precepts, is that they're very cut and dry in terms of, these are like the 10 commandments, do them and then you'll be following this path. But I think in our tradition, they're considered to be a lot more about developing your situational wisdom and really exploring these personally in your own life. So it's not just theoretical, but you're actually trying to discover for yourself, well, what does it actually mean not to harm other beings? I have to eat food, so what does that mean? And how do I decide for myself what an ethical practice of that precept would look like? Of course, if you say, well, they're kind of situational, right? It's hard to explain. You'll develop it over time. Then it sounds like, oh, well, anything goes. But that's not true either. I was speaking to a colleague at work because I had done a short guided meditation for our work colleagues at a meeting. And so people were very curious about Buddhism. And he said, I practice a vegan diet and I really try not to harm other living beings. Yet I have this land out in the country now, and I have some invasive plants growing on my land. And I wondered, well, what do you think I should do about it? And I said, well, of course, I had to tell him a couple stories because a lot of our tradition is trying to capture the interesting, maybe the tricky way of navigating these kinds of situations. So one story that Haju has told over the years that I think relates to this, and which I told my colleague, was a story of there's a monk out in a forest hermitage, and as he's out working outside one day, he sees two hunters come by, and he knows that there's been deer in the area and can see their tracks. And the hunters, they look well fed. They're just out to catch something, and they ask the monk, well, do you know if there's any deer in this area? And he points in the opposite direction of the tracks, sending them away. And then later on, someone who is starving, doesn't have enough food, asks the same question. And the monk points in the direction of the deer tracks. And so I told my colleague, I said, well, this may not really answer your question about invasive plants, but I think it's something for you to think about, is that it's not just a yes or no answer, and I can then apply it in any circumstance. I have to really look deeply at what's needed in that particular situation. So maybe you only have a few invasive plants and they're not really hurting anything. But if you just decide that they're bad and weed them, maybe that's causing harm. At the same time, if your land is overtaken by invasive plants and it's damaging the whole ecosystem, well, maybe you would make a different assessment of what the wise move would be to do there. So that's all just to say that directly applying this in your daily life is something that you have to discover how it works for you within this larger container. And it may change as you develop more wisdom. It may change in the situation. And so that's why this is such a rich practice, because we don't have that list of do's and don'ts. We're really learning to work with it in a lot of messy circumstances. And so, yeah, I told him that, then I realized, well, maybe I didn't do a good job of really explaining, okay, well, if it's not so cut and dry, how do I know if I'm at least on the right track? And so one aspect of working with precepts is also understanding that we're sort of observing the cause and effect, right? We're not just doing something and saying, oh, well, did I follow the letter of the law? We're actually noticing what happens and then responding from that place for the next time. And this book by Diane Eshin-Rossetto has a phrase in there that I had read many years ago, and it's always stuck with me, because we say that all the precepts sort of relate back to that first precept of cherishing all life. And so the others are kind of just offshoots of that in some ways. And so the phrase that she asks as sort of that guiding compass question is, what serves life? In this situation, what would serve life? And so that's something that I find really useful just to come back to as an encapsulation of that guiding question of cherishing life. What serves life? And as I mentioned at the beginning, when we start working with these precepts, particularly if we have a frame of reference where in other traditions that we've maybe practiced with or learned about, that there's a notion of living up to some standard, or kind of beating ourselves up, or using shame or guilt to get ourselves to kind of follow the rules. But the Buddhist concept of following precepts is not so much about somehow becoming this perfected individual who never makes mistakes. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite of that. It's more just learning from your mistakes. We're not trying to just abstain from our own humanity. And so the only way that I know that we can do that practice is in relation to other people and other beings. So it's not happening in a vacuum, and it's not about becoming this kind of perfect, upright individual who follows all the rules properly. And so I have a little story that maybe does a better job of illustrating that. This is a really beautiful book by this teacher, Dosho Port, who's an American Zen teacher who's a disciple of a Japanese teacher who came to Minnesota many years ago and died a couple decades ago. Dainin Katagiri was his name. And so this is Dosho Port's kind of tribute to all of the things that he learned from his teacher. And so this is in the chapter called, Does Zen Have Morals? As a young monk at Peaceful Storehouse Temple, one of Dainin's duties was to prepare a bath for his master, Daicho, which means great tides, by heating water with a small wooden stove under the bathtub. Dainin had to be careful with the fire so as to neither freeze nor boil the teacher. One day after great tides got into the tub, Dainin poked his head into the bathroom to see if the water was right. Without thinking, Dainin asked, "May I scrub your back?" Daicho Roshi grunted, "No." This offer and response were repeated during the next bath and the next. One day, Dainin didn't ask. He directly entered the bathroom, took up the brush, and scrubbed his master's back. Daicho Roshi moaned, "Ah." Afterward, Dainin asked Great Tides, "Why did you previously refuse my kindness when I asked you, 'Shall I wash your back?'" Great Tides responded, "You fool! You are ridiculous. Don't insert any extra thought in dealing with something." And so Dosho Port goes on to talk a little bit about this idea of showing up in the moment without bringing any extra preconceptions to it, just doing the right thing, just doing what serves life, seeing the master needs his back scrubbed and not making a big deal out of it, just becoming the tool. So he has this other just brief anecdote that I wanted to share because it was really beautiful. And I hadn't remembered it when I read this book a few years ago. So a really old story explores this. These are a couple of other figures in this story from Zen history. Yunyan asked Baizhang, "Every day there is hard work to do. Who do you do it for, master?" Baizhang replied, "For the one who requires it." Yunyan replied, "Why don't you let her do it herself?" Baizhang said, "She has no tools." So who is Baizhang serving, Dosho Port writes. Sometimes there is no confusion, and we can go straight ahead, following the letter of the precepts and the training rules of the environment in which we find ourselves. Sometimes, however, there is a fork in the road while trying to serve the truth. Stay or go in a marriage, what to say and what to withhold from a child or from a friend. Live this lie or that one. What does the Zen tradition have to say to help us serve the truth? Are there any general guidelines to sort through ethical quandaries such as these? Given the ever slippery ego, whatever guidelines could be put forward might well be co-opted to serve our selfish agendas. Perhaps this is what Great Tide sensed from Dinan's offer to scrub his back. A false face, a manipulating ego bent on easing Dinan's own anxiety. Take that stinky thing out of here. I'm engaged in cleansing, might have been the subtext to Great Tide's no. Dinan came back repeatedly to investigate the obstruction. So here's that cause and effect, right? He's running this experiment. May I scrub your back? He passed through by not asking. He served what the truth required by becoming a tool, a monk with a scrub brush. Great Tide said, ah. It's kind of a fun one. So what time it is? I just have a couple more things to say, I think. Yeah. So maybe just one more brief story and then any comments or questions. So what I like about that story is it illustrates all of those themes that I've been trying to draw out, sort of the situational wisdom, not making the precept following about ourselves doing the right thing, but becoming the tool that serves life in that moment. And one other thing that I've learned from the clay pottery teacher is that when you're working with the clay, when you're doing the centering, what they taught us was make the clay move to your hands. Don't allow your hands to be moved by the clay. And so I was thinking about that in terms of being given this container of precepts, and the messy clay as before it's centered is maybe sort of like our ego, where it's just kind of pushing us around. But by following that form, we can actually bring the ego more in line with how it can best serve other people. So the last story that I wanted to tell was just something from my own life, very brief. My next door neighbors are a retired couple. The husband worked on the automotive line for GE for his whole career, and he still has the blue coverall jumpsuit with his name on the patch that he wears around a lot. And they live on a fixed income. And so over the years that we've been there, occasionally we've helped them out if they didn't have enough money that month. And we live in a townhouse that shares a center wall. So you can sometimes hear people talking next door, and we live kind of on top of each other in that sense. So it's very communal. And a couple of years ago, I think I'd heard through an open window when I was coming into our home, my neighbor talking about, that they were kind of coming up short that month on grocery money. And so I was telling this to my husband, that I had overheard it and thinking, well, we have plenty. How can we help them? But we don't want to embarrass them. We want to respect that, maybe they don't really need our help. They didn't ask, but I also felt like I couldn't not act on it. And so we came up with this kind of ruse. So this is maybe a good example, or maybe not a good example. I'm not sure. My teachers can tell me if this is a good example of trying to work with the precepts. At the time, my husband had a job where if he worked overtime, sometimes for extra compensation, they would give us gift cards to different places. And so I said, well, we could go to Kroger, which is, I know they like to shop at Kroger, and we could get a gift card. And then we could say we got an extra gift card that month. But we don't really need it. We don't really go to Kroger that much. And so he was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that. So we went over with the Kroger gift card and said, oh, we just happened to get this extra gift card, and, we shop at Whole Foods, and, I know you guys like to go to Kroger, and, could you use this? And they said, oh yeah, thank you so much. And then they said, well, just a minute. Someone gave us this Whole Foods gift card, and we don't like to go there. Could you use it? And so we're like, well, of course, we'd be happy to take the Whole Foods gift card. So we kind of swapped. And I was thinking about that because maybe a good indicator that you're discovering the interrelationality of working with these precepts is when you're doing what you think is the right thing, and then you encounter this situation where you can experience your own humility and your own interrelationality to other people. And so that's my example. So thank you. We have maybe just a couple minutes for any questions or comments. Yeah. Oh, yes, the microphone. 1 second so that other people can hear you. Oops. Okay. Try that. Thanks, Mom.
Thank you so much for leading today's talk. I really enjoyed the queries. My question is kind of in relation to what you were saying about like the analogy of pouring yourself into a container. I don't really get it. I was wondering if you can help me kind of understand it a bit better.
Sure. Yeah. Oh. Thanks, Mom. Well, I guess that's how I personally think about some of the practices that we do here. When you show up as a new person, we have all of these different forms of bowing, sitting a certain way, chanting. And you'll find that in general in a Zen community, we don't do a lot of explaining about why we do any of those things. We just ask you to follow along. So we're giving you a container, and you have the choice of, am I going to attempt to follow along and embody this? And, sort of what's the point of it all? And I think that over time, the reason why that is the instruction method is so that you can discover for yourself what you actually are learning by doing that embodied form, what it teaches you through doing it. So the direct experience. And so that's sort of what I guess I meant about the container and pouring yourself into it, is actually having the direct experience of practice and learning for yourself what it means and what it feels like. Does that help? Thank you. Good question. Anyone else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And we've got some announcements, I think, here from Samoon.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello.
Would you like to sit?
Sure. Thank you. I really enjoyed the metaphor of spinning clay and centering the clay and having it not you bowing to its will, but
Yeah.
Okay, so this week's announcements are somewhat similar to last week's, if you're here. If you weren't, welcome, especially for new people. I know I've met a few today. We've got these regular 10 a.m. services, and we're also offering the 4 a.m. p.m. services. I would try that. Yeah. And thank you today, Jagwa, for leading the service. We've also got yoga classes in the evenings on Tuesday nights. At that time, it's 6:30 to 8. We've got an upcoming overnight meditation course in a few weeks. May 20 and 21st. So that will be a Friday and a Saturday. You'll have an opportunity to learn meditation forms and stay over and enjoy company and a meal. And next week we've got a family service. I don't know how many people here. I know there are a few.
Yeah,
at least.
it's on the
No, not.
15th.
Actually, the 15th now.
15th.
Oh, the family is on the 15th.
It got moved for Buddha's
Oh.
birthday.
Okay. And Buddha's birthday,
Is the 15th.
Same day.
15 too. Okay. But yeah, it is something you possibly want to start doing now that we're back at it. I don't know if it's a joint service or if there's one outside or not.
It will be outside. So adults will be inside, families will be outside.
Yeah, so that'll be nice.
And we'll all come together to eat cake.
Oh, good,
Outside.
good, okay. Good plan. And for today, we've got refuge recovery or Dharma recovery
Yes,
in the
we'll be
basement.
meeting in the lower annex today.
Yeah, you just pass through the door here and there's stairs that take you down. And also, Buddha's birthday you heard about is coming up in a couple of weeks. Let's see, that's actually 2 weeks now. And there's a variety of events that will be taking place.
There will be a 10 a.m. service for adults and also for children. And then there will be a Zoom service in the evening to light the lanterns.
Okay, yeah, and that's on Sunday evening.
Is it only Zoom or can we also come?
Working on the details. Let you know next week.
Okay, and related to that, you might know that we also have these lanterns, these beautiful ones that renew themselves every few years. We've got them up, and one of the main plans for the Sunday evening service is to dedicate these lanterns, and people can do that individually. We have basically like placards that we hang from underneath, and it's a really nice service. We've got like the idea of planting the lanterns after dark, and you can make dedications to help yourself and others. Sometimes that involves enlightenment or gratitude or just good wishes for people. So we've actually got some sheets of paper right outside the door here on the left that I believe are peach colored, and they're some just like that. Thanks. And they've got a little space for you to work with to start writing something. And I don't know if we're doing something this year where we're able to sort of draw our own, or if will be provided for us.
Both. If you don't want to, if you're not interested in artwork, just write your dedication. And if you do want to do artwork, next Sunday we'll have the circles available for you to decorate.
Okay, that's also very nice too. We have crayons and things, pens to help. So it's a wonderful service. So thanks to you all for coming today. And
Could you talk about gardens, please?
oh, sure. We've now got regular garden practice here on Saturday at 3 to 5. And we're doing work currently with weeding some thistle that decided to blossom everywhere around the garden. Scattering clover seed, aerating the soil, now actually planting some plants. So it's a great time. And you're free to just show up in any time during that period. And afterwards, we enjoy some snacks and have a good Dharma conversation. So if that's it for all the comments, I just wanted to say thank you all for coming and for everyone's help and donations. And if you care to, today there is a fishbowl right outside the door as well. And I wish you all a good week. And I believe at this point, the mats and cushions are all good, and we'll just
Take away the
The
second
back
row.
rows.
Oh, the back rows can go? Okay. We've got them located in the back then during the week, so you could bring them over there if you get a chance. Thank you. I'll pass this over for noble truth.
Great vows.
Great vows.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's do them.
Okay.
So please repeat after me the 4 great vows. All beings, one body.
All beings, one body.
I vow to liberate.
I vow to liberate.
Blind passions, one root.
Blind passions, one root.
I vow to terminate.
I vow to terminate.
Dharma gates, one mind.
Dharma gates, one mind.
I vow to penetrate.
I vow to penetrate.
The great way of Buddha.
The great way of Buddha.
I vow to realize.
I vow to realize.
And then please just stand and we'll finish with 3 formal vows in front of the altar.